Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is about Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the queen of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC, and was also the last active ruler of ancient Egypt. But before we get into today's video, to those who are new to this channel, please feel free to click on the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you would be notified about the latest updates. So without any delay, let's get right into the video. Cleopatra VII was born in early 69 BC to the ruling Ptolemaic pharaoh Ptolemy XII and an unknown mother, presumably Ptolemy XII's wife Cleopatra VI Tryphena, also known as Cleopatra V Tryphena. The Ptolemies were descended from a Macedonian general who had served under Alexander the Great. Although they had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, their kingdom was eclipsed by the power of Rome, and there was a great deal of internal dissension that eventually led to Cleopatra fighting against her own brother. The name Cleopatra symbolizes glory of the father. She was one of the 5 children of Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra V of Egypt. Her siblings' names included Berenica IV, Arsinoe IV, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV. Although not much is available about her early life, young royal women of the Ptolemaic dynasty were well educated, and although the Library of Alexandria was no longer the intellectual powerhouse of the Mediterranean, the facility and its adjacent research center, the Mausoleum, were still a center for learning. Cleopatra took medical studies and was a medical writer. As a young woman, she studied philosophy, rhetoric, and oratory with a tutor. She was a gifted linguist. In addition to her native Greek, Plutarch reported that she spoke Ethiopian, Troglodyte, Hebraic, probably Aramaic or less likely Hebrew, Arabic, Syrian, Median, and Parthian, as well as many others. She undoubtedly read Greek, Egyptian, and Latin, and perhaps others. In 58 BCE, Cleopatra's father Ptolemy XII fled to Rome to escape his angry people in the face of a declining economy and the dawning perception that he was a puppet of Rome. His daughter Berenica IV seized the throne in his absence, but by 55 BCE, Rome reinstalled him and executed Berenica, making Cleopatra the next in line for the throne. On the death of Ptolemy XII in February or March of 51 BCE, the rule of Egypt was to go to Cleopatra and her brother and husband, Ptolemy XIII. The 18-year-old Cleopatra, older than her brother by about 8 years, became the dominant ruler. Evidence shows that the first decree in which Ptolemy's name precedes Cleopatra's was in October of 50 BCE. In 49 BC, Ptolemy XIII advisors instigated a revolt against Cleopatra VII's rule and expelled her from Alexandria. Cleopatra VII fled to Syria, where she raised an army of mercenaries to defeat her brother in order to declare the throne for herself. In 48 BC, Cleopatra VII returned to Egypt to face her brother at Pelusium, on Egypt's eastern border. Around this same time, the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey had spread out of Rome, and Caesar pursued Pompey, who had fled to Egypt. However, Pompey was assassinated by Ptolemy XIII upon his arrival in Egypt. Caesar was about 30 years older than Cleopatra, and his arrival in Egypt was something of an accident. He had been fighting a civil war against the Roman general Pompey. After a series of defeats, Pompey fled to Egypt in 48 BC, hoping to win support from Ptolemy XIII. The young pharaoh decided that Pompey was more trouble than he was worth and had him executed. When Caesar landed with a small body of troops in Alexandria, he was presented with Pompey's head, which was said that he was unhappy about it. Caesar then decided to stay in Egypt and deal with the dispute between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra. It could be because Rome depended on Egypt for its grain supplies, and a stable Egypt was seen by Caesar as being in Rome's interest. Ptolemy XIII tried to convince Caesar to acknowledge him as sole ruler of Egypt and barred Cleopatra from seeing him. Cleopatra, however, managed to sneak into the palace in Alexandria and successfully plead her case to Caesar, something that surprised and enraged Ptolemy XIII. Cleopatra VII arranged to meet Caesar, who had arrived in Egypt, reportedly by smuggling herself in a carpet that was delivered to his bedchambers. Early the next morning, Ptolemy XIII found Cleopatra and Julius Caesar together. So he joined forces with his youngest sister, Arsinoe, fearing Cleopatra VII would convince Caesar to eliminate him. During the winter of 47 BC, Caesar's forces won a crushing victory against Ptolemy XIII at the Battle of the Nile and banished Arsinoe to Rome. Caesar restored Cleopatra VII and her youngest brother Ptolemy XIV to the throne. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra named her newborn son Ptolemy Caesarion, emphasizing that this was the son of Julius Caesar. In 45 BC, Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIV made their grand entrance with Caesarion into Rome. In Rome, Caesar held a triumphal celebration of his victories, which included the parading of defeated enemy, Arsinoe. She was accommodated in Caesar's private villa beyond the Tiber River and may have been present to witness the dedication of a golden statue of herself in the Temple of Venus. Genetrix, the ancestress of the Julian family to which Caesar belonged. At that time, he was already married to Calpurnia, yet Cleopatra claimed to be his wife, added to political tensions in Rome that ended with Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE. Cleopatra was in Rome when Caesar was murdered in 44 BCE. As Caesar was entering the Senate, he was assassinated by 23 daggers thrust into him by some of his friends as well as his enemies. Devastated by Caesar's assassination, and surrounded by Roman hostility, Cleopatra VII went back to Egypt. In July 44 BC, Cleopatra had her co-ruler and younger brother/husband Ptolemy XIV killed, and Caesarion became co-ruler of Egypt. In 42 BC, Mark Antony, part of the second triumvirate that ruled Rome following the murder of Caesar, sent for Cleopatra VII so that she could answer questions about her allegiance to Caesar. Cleopatra VII agreed to his request and sailed to Tarsus in an elaborate ship, dressed in the robes of Isis to meet with Antony. Captivated by her beauty and personality, Antony fell in love with her. Cleopatra then returned to Egypt, followed by Antony, who abandoned his plans for the invasion of the Parthian Empire and also left behind his third wife, Fulvia, and their children in Rome. During the winter of 41 to 40 BC, at Cleopatra's request, Antony sent orders for the execution of Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, who is in Rome. Her younger sister was a possible rival for the throne of Egypt. In 40 BC, Cleopatra VII gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene by Antony. Meanwhile, Antony went to Athens as his wife Fulvia had died in 40 BCE. He then agreed to marry Octavia, the sister of his rival Octavius. In 37 BC, Antony again met with Cleopatra VII to obtain funds to resume his campaign against the Parthian Empire. In exchange, he agreed to return much of Egypt's eastern empire, including Cyprus, Crete, Libya, Jericho and large portions of Syria and Lebanon. Cleopatra then joined Antony at Antioch, near Turkey, where they got married. This was not only illegal under Roman law, it was a betrayal of Octavia, his legal wife and the sister of Octavian. In 36 to 35 BC, Cleopatra VII gave birth to another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus by Antony. In 34 BC, Antony celebrated his gains from the Parthians in Alexandria. In the celebrations, known as the Donations of Alexandria, Antony declared Caesarion as Caesar's son and rightful heir and awarded land to each of his children with Cleopatra VII. This began a war of propaganda between him and the Octavian, who claimed that Antony was under Cleopatra's control and would abandon Rome for Egypt. In late 32 BC, the Roman Senate stripped Antony of all his titles, and Octavian declared war on Cleopatra. At the time, Antony and Cleopatra lived together in Greece. The Battle of Actium, in which Octavian faced the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra on September 2nd, 31st BCE, was a disaster for the Egyptians. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, and Cleopatra retired to her mausoleum as Antony went off to fight his last battle. With Octavian in control of the sea, he landed troops in Egypt and marched on Alexandria, the capital of Egypt. Although Antony managed to win a minor battle on land, he and Cleopatra were essentially trapped. So, Antony took the extraordinary measure of volunteering to kill himself to spare Cleopatra's life. However, Octavian wrote to Cleopatra stating that if she would get rid of Antony, she could ask of him any favor. Cleopatra realized she was not powerful enough to expel Antony from Egypt or assassinate him, and as such conceived a plot where she sent a message to Antony saying that she had killed herself. Upon receiving the false news that Cleopatra had died, Antony fell on his sword. In a last excess of devotion, he had himself carried to Cleopatra's retreat and there died, after bidding her to make her peace with Octavian. After this, Cleopatra attempted to commit suicide by setting fire to the mausoleum. However, Roman soldiers thwarted her plans and she was taken captive. Octavian promised that he would keep her alive but offered no explanation about his future plans for her kingdom. A spy informed her that Octavian planned to move her and her children to Rome in 3 days. She prepared for suicide as she had no intentions of being paraded in a Roman triumph like her sister Arsinoe IV. It is unclear if Cleopatra's suicide on 10 August 30th BC, at age 39, took place within the palace or her tomb. It is said she was accompanied by her servants Ares and Charmian, who also took their own lives. Octavian was said to have been angered by this outcome but had Cleopatra buried in royal fashion next to Antony in her tomb. Cleopatra's physician Olympus did not explain her cause of death, although the popular belief is that she allowed an asp or Egyptian cobra to bite and poison her. Plutarch relates this tale, but then suggests an implement which was used to introduce the toxin by scratching, while Dio says that she injected the poison with a needle, and Strabo argued for an ointment of some kind. No venomous snake was found with her body, but she did have tiny puncture wounds on her arm that could have been caused by a needle. Before committing suicide, Cleopatra sent Caesarion to hide in the east of Egypt near the Red Sea. Octavian had Caesarion killed but spared the lives of the 3 children Cleopatra had with Antony. They were sent to live with Octavia. While the 3 kids were allowed to live, the 2 oldest kids had to take part in a triumph. For Octavian in Rome, where they were paraded along with an effigy of their dead mother, 2 of the children, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, died in childhood while a 3rd, Cleopatra Selene, survived and was married to Juba II, a protege of Octavian who became ruler of Numidia, a client kingdom of Rome in northwest Africa in what is now Algeria. She brought Egyptian art as well as Greek language and culture to that kingdom. Cleopatra had lived in a highly literate age, and her actions had influenced the formation of the Roman Empire. Her story could not be forgotten. Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, was determined that Roman history should be recorded in a way that confirmed his right to rule. To achieve this, he published his own autobiography and censored Rome's official records. As Cleopatra had played a key role in his struggle to power, her story was preserved as an integral part of his, but it was diminished to just 2 parts of her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Cleopatra, stripped of any political validity, was to be remembered as an immoral foreign woman who tempted upright Roman men. As such, she became a useful enemy for Octavian, who preferred to be remembered for fighting against foreigners rather than against his fellow Romans. This official Roman version of a predatory, immoral Cleopatra passed into Western culture, where it was retold and reinterpreted as the years passed, until it evolved into a story of a wicked life made good by an honorable death. Meanwhile, Muslim scholars, writing after the Arab conquest of Egypt about 640 CE, developed their own version of the queen. Their Cleopatra was first and foremost a scholar and a scientist, a gifted philosopher and a chemist. Plutarch's Parallel Lives, translated from the Greek into French by Jacques Amiot, 1559, and then from the French into English by Sir Thomas North, 1579, served as the inspiration behind Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra, 1606-07. Shakespeare dropped some of Plutarch's disapproval and allowed his queen to become a true heroine. His was by no means the first revision of Cleopatra, nor was it to be the last, but his is the Cleopatra that has lingered longest in the public imagination. In the 20th century, Cleopatra's story was preserved and further developed through film. Many actresses, including Theda Bara, 1917, Claudette Colbert, 1934, and Elizabeth Taylor, 1963, have played the Queen, typically in expensive, exotic films that concentrate on the Queen's love life rather than her politics. Meanwhile, Cleopatra's seductive beauty that is not supported by the Queen's contemporary portraiture has been used to sell a wide range of products, from cosmetics to cigarettes. In the late 20th century, Cleopatra's racial heritage became a subject of intense academic debate, with some African American scholars embracing Cleopatra as a black African heroine. Okay guys, that is all for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell to receive the latest update from my channel. See you soon in another interesting video. Bye.